Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Recha Kodash. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of Jeremiah, the 10th chapter. And in this chapter, as you can see, it says a satire of idolatry. And basically goes into the idolatrous ways, right, of the heathens that Jake or Israel at the time were adopting. Okay, once again, as the Lord continues, on his, this is all still prior to him commencing the judgment, but calling out the faults of Israel while also giving them a last warning via the prophet Jeremiah. So this is Jeremiah 10:1. Hear ye the word which the Lord Yahweh speaketh unto you, O house of Israel. And keep in mind, as Jeremiah is saying this, he's prophesying, right? He's speaking onto Israel, but just as they do today, right? They did back then, they won't listen. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, learn not the way of the heathen, and be not dismayed at the signs of heaven. Now, dismayed here meaning to be startled or afraid or troubled at the signs of heaven, because a part of the customs of the heathen was reading like the heavens, right, and basically taking auspices and using that to basically say, like, for example, the gods are angry, or we're not going to get rain this season, or those kinds of things. And so they would be dismayed, or they would be troubled or afraid based on the things that they saw. But the Lord was telling Israel through Jeremiah that doesn't necessarily apply to us, because the course of events that affect us are dictated by Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai. And so he would send prophets that would tell you the words of his mouth. All right. And that is what you should take heed to, versus being troubled or losing your mind over signs in the heavens. Because the stars and the moon and the sun, they do not determine what prophecy is, right? The Lord does. But in the minds of these heathens, it's the other way around. And that's why it says, for the heathen are dismayed at them. For the customs of the people are vain. For one cutteth a tree out of the forest, the work of the hands of the workmen with the axe. Now, in verses 3 to to about 5, Jeremiah is describing, right, the custom of idol making, right, and worshiping as they were doing back then. Okay, and oftentimes, we'll use Jeremiah 10 as a precept, for the pagan or even idolatrous ways that our people follow today. For example, one being like Christmas, right? And the only distinction here is that during Jeremiah's time, as he was describing, they would cut the tree and they would actually carve out an image from it, right? And then they would deck it, right, and actually like plate it with gold and silver, and then fasten it or keep it upright, or else it would fall down. Okay, so that's what he's describing here. But the reason we're able to still apply this till today in terms of things like Christmas is because when people when you follow, right, or celebrate things like Christmas, that is a form of idol worship, except you're not carving an idol out of the tree. The tree itself is likened onto the idol, and the plating of it is done not with real gold and silver, but with the little decorations that you put upon it. Okay, so Christmas is really just like a modern day version of what Jeremiah is describing here in the 10th chapter, right? That the customs that Israelites were following. But it's important to note this distinction, right? Because, there are people out there that will say, oh, well, but when you actually go to Jeremiah 10, he's really describing making idols. So you can't say that it's talking about Christmas and yada, yada, and these other pagan holidays. So you have to be able to, one, understand the context, but also know how to defend that point. and how it still applies anyway to this day, right? So it says here, verse 3, for the customs of the people are vain, for one cutteth a tree out of the forest. Now, based on how it's worded in the King James Version, it sounds like it's speaking of just a tree, in itself. But when it goes into the work of the hands of the workman with the axe, the workman cuts the tree, okay? But after cutting the tree, as it's written in different, like Isaiah and Hosea, after they cut the tree, they carve, all right, they carve out the actual image of the idol, okay? And I'll pull this up in like another translation, for example. It says here, NLT, their ways are futile and foolish. They cut down a tree, and a craftsman carves an idol. NIV, for the practices of the peoples are worthless. They cut a tree out of the forest, and a craftsman shapes it with his chisel. So yeah, let's keep on going. It says here, verse 4, they deck it with silver and with gold. They fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not. Right? So the decking is like the plating of it, right? With that gold and that silver to make it look more, more valuable or more precious or whatnot. And then by fastening it with nails, right, and hammering it down so that it doesn't move or fall, right, it'll be stationary. As it leads into verse 5, they are upright as a palm tree, right, but speak not. So they're, by nailing it down, they're able to have it stand up straight like a tree. But obviously it doesn't speak. They must needs be born. The word born means carried, because they cannot go, because they can't walk or move, right? Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither also is it in them to do good. So at the time, right, just like these heathens worshiping these idols, this was the custom. This is how they would make it. And then they would bow down to it and they would serve it and they would be afraid of it. But the Lord was telling Israel through Jeremiah that these idols, they don't talk, they don't move, they can't do evil or good. Okay? They're not like the Most High, so don't fear them. All right? And, basically, as I just described, if you look at the process of modern day, like Christmas, for example, which goes back to the Babylonians and the Assyrians, right, which had influence around this time. So Jake had heard and seen and even partook of those customs, right? When you even go to the time of, I think it was it Ahaz, who actually met with the Assyrian king, I think in Syria, and ended up sending blueprints for how they should build a different designed altar, right? A pagan altar in I think it was either in the temple or in Jerusalem, right? By the time that he would get back there. So he did a lot of wickedness too. But the only difference here, right, is when you look at, like, for example, Christmas today, it's a custom, it's a heathenistic custom, right? Even the star that they put on the very top of it and the decorating of it, that goes back to pagan practices, in which they do cut a tree, right? Except today, the workman doesn't actually carve an idol out of it. That would be too blatant and too obvious. So they just keep the tree as is, right? As an upright tree. But in people, in you decorating it, putting the presents under it, and basically just setting it up in your house, that is idolizing it, right? Where the tree in itself is likened onto the idol in your house. Because that's how, in the ancient practice or in the custom, that's how they actually saw the tree, like an idol. Okay. It says here, and they deck it with silver and gold, right, as people do today, and they fasten it with nails and with hammers that it move not, or they'll put it inside of those artificial like foot holders or whatnot, where you just shove the tree in there. As it says, they are upright as the palm tree, but speak not. They must needs be born or carried, because they cannot go. Be not afraid of them, for they cannot do evil, neither is it in them to do good. So today people do this, but they don't really actually realize, at least a lot of them don't, they don't realize what it is that they're actually partaking in. All right, but it's just a variation of the same practice that Jeremiah was describing back then. Verse 6, for as much as there is none like unto thee, O Yahweh, thou art great, and thy name is great in might. So the context of the chapter is the comparison, as Jeremiah is trying to make it apparent that these idols are not like the Most High. You're trying to follow the customs of a foreign nation who worship wood and stone. Meanwhile, you have a living God, and there's no comparison. So open up your eyes, fix up your mind, and come and serve the God, the living God that is watching over you. That's why he says, for as much as there is none like unto thee, right? There's nobody matches you, right? The Most High, that is. Thou art great, and thy name is great in might. So even the name alone of the Lord is mighty and has power. Who would not fear thee, O King of nations? For to thee doth it appertain, meaning the title, right? That authority pertains or belongs to the Lord as King of nations, really the King of the universe. For as much as among all the wise men of the nations, and in all their kingdoms, there is none like unto thee. So there's no other God, there's no wisdom, there's no nation that has a God like the Most High. The Most High, no replica or anything close, any being can come close to the Most High anywhere else. There's only one, and he is in the midst of Israel. But they are altogether brutish and foolish. The stock is a doctrine of vanities. So the idols themselves and the worshipers and followers of them is a brutish and foolish concept. The stock, being like the wood of the tree, is a doctrine of vanities. The stock here is just short for the idols that are made from that material. And the doctrine of it is the worship, or the religion, or the belief of it is vanities, right? It's a vanities, meaning it amounts to nothing. The only difference that happens when you worship idols is that you now heap a target onto yourself. But in terms of how that changes the course of events in your life, it doesn't. You're just adding an extra action that you do, which is to bow down to wood. And then, you're just basically fooling yourself. But nothing is actually working, okay? Because it's all coming from the Lord, both on the right hand and the left hand. That's why he mentioned that it's vanity. Silver spread into plates is brought from Tarshish. And the spread is like when they beat the silver. I looked it up here, like the process. And it says here, beating silver into sheet, which is the plates, involves melting it into an ingot, then using a rolling mill to gradually flatten the metal. Between passes through the mill, the silver must be annealed, which is to heat it. By heating it up, it softens it. As it says, to soften it and relieve work hardening. This process of rolling and annealing continues until the desired thickness is achieved. So Jeremiah is saying here that form, right, that of silver that they use in decorating and plating these idols, they get from Tarshish, and gold from Uphaz, the work of the workman, right, which is the craftsman, and of the hands of the founder. And the founder, when you look that word up, is just somebody that's also skilled in one of the processes of this idol making. So let's look into that word founder, right? It says to smelt, right? Smelter, refiner, goldsmith. So those that labor in the actual production of that form of silver or gold that they would then use in this idol making. Which, what I mean by that is, they would provide this form, but you had those whose jobs it would be to melt it down into whatever shape or whatever thinness that whoever the customer is desired, and then they would do with it what they want. Blue and purple is their clothing, meaning the clothing of the idols, right? They would wrap it up, with, as it says, blue and purple, which is supposed to represent like royalty or some dignity or power, but they are all the work of cunning men, right? And cunning men meaning those skillful in this art or in this work. Verse 10, but the Lord Yahweh is the true God. He is the living God and an everlasting King. At his wrath the earth shall tremble, and the nations shall not be able to abide his indignation. See, so as we read up above where it mentioned that these idols cannot do good or evil, Jeremiah is making the contrast here and saying, but with the Lord, the living God, when he gets angry, do you feel that on the earth? Right? And when he unleashes his wrath, nobody will be able to abide or endure that indignation. Verse 11, thus shall ye say unto them, the gods that have not made, and this is what the words of the Lord, the gods that have not made the heavens and the earth. So these idols that you regard to be creators, which indeed haven't actually created anything. They didn't make the heavens. They didn't make the earth. Those same very idols, those pseudo gods, even they shall perish from the earth, meaning they're going to be destroyed. They're not going to last. And from under these heavens. So under the very same heavens that you think your wood and stone had the power to create, they're going to be destroyed from under those very same heavens. And then you come and tell me if they had the power to actually create it or not. He hath made the earth by his power. He hath established the world by his wisdom. He hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion. Okay, so this being the Most High, right? The creation of the earth and life came from the Lord. It was by his power that it was all orchestrated and set up. When you read in the book of Genesis, it says that the powers, right? The angels, Yahweh and angels, which were physically doing the creation, after each day or after each thing was done, each portion, they would say that it was good. And what they meant by it was good was that it was good when good is according to a standard. When you go to school and you're taking an exam, there's a standard, right? 65 is passing, 80 is a B, or 90 is an A, and 95 and over is an A plus. Those are standards by which your grade is measured. So when you say like you got a bad grade, that bad is dictated by that standard that's set. That good grade is dictated by the standard of an 80 or a 90 or a 95. So when they said it was good, it had to be by some standard, and that standard was the wisdom or the blueprint of the Most High. That's why I mentioned that he established the world by his wisdom. So all the creation was still according to the wisdom of the Lord, and the creators, right, the Yahweh and the angels, which did the physical creation or the building, followed the wisdom of the Lord to establish the world that we see now, and hath stretched out the heavens by his discretion, also going into his wisdom. Okay, so in other words, all creation came of the Lord, right? His understanding, his intelligence. Because, I mean, nobody here can explain to you how space is created. Verse 13, when he uttereth his voice, there is a multitude of waters in the heavens, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth. And this is describing the Lord's control over the course of nature, right? The elements, the rain, the thunderings, right? And this is referring to like symbolizing like thunderings of the Lord in the rain, right? That's why it mentions there is a multitude of waters in the heavens. In the NLT, it says here, when he speaks in the thunder, the heavens roar with rain, and he causeth the clouds to rise over the earth. Now, actually, when it says that, and he causeth the vapors to ascend from the ends of the earth, today that's known as evaporation, part of the water cycle, where you would have, basically heat, right, causes evaporation, where you have the liquid that is transformed into a gas state, and that then goes up into the heavens and then forms, it culminates eventually into those, clouds. And then when they have enough, right, when it can't hold anymore, it transforms back into a liquid state as rain. So if we were to look up here, what is the process of evaporation? Yeah, evaporation, condensation, and precipitation. So it says here, evaporation, condensation, and precipitation are three key stages in the water cycle. Evaporation is when liquid water turns into gas. So you can see this diagram here, right? So, the earth, anything like liquid, when it gets really hot, that causes the liquid to transform into gas. Okay. And when it transforms into gas, it goes up into the heavens, which leads into the next cycle, right? As it says, evaporation is when liquid water turns into gas, water vapor, due to heat, often from the sun. Condensation is the reverse, where water vapor cools and turns back into liquid water droplets, forming clouds. Precipitation occurs when these water droplets become too heavy and fall to earth as rain, snow, sleet, or hail. Okay, so going back to Jeremiah 10 and 13, when it mentions he causeth the vapors to ascend, that's the process of evaporation from the ends of the earth. He maketh lightnings with rain. So when there's lightning, when there's rain, and all of those things, the Most High is the one orchestrating or controlling it. And Jeremiah is saying this to highlight the power and the of the living God that we serve in comparison to these idols that are just literally wood and stone. And bringeth forth the wind out of his treasures. And so when the Lord causes it to to be windy, or there's a storm and all that, the Lord is in control of that. And in fact, you'll see this use of this terminology of like his treasures in a few places, namely also in the book of Esdras, second Esdras, I believe the 6th chapter. And it gives this image as though like hail, right? The hail, the rain, the snow, storm, all of those are almost like tools in the Lord's treasure or armory somewhere that he releases at his pleasure or at his will. Just for like a visual. So if we look into the definition of the word treasures here, what's that? Awatazar. It says treasure, storehouse, magazine of weapons, figurative for God's army, or storehouses of God for rain, snow, hail, wind, and sea. Okay, so there's that. So back in Jeremiah 10, verse 13, or really going on to 14, every man is brutish in his knowledge, meaning brutish is like senseless, right? In his knowledge, every founder is confounded in the graven image. And the founder being those that, once again, they play a role in the process of this idol making, right? We read about them a couple of verses above. So those who are in making this, right, the knowledge of them is brutish in the sight of the Lord. As the scriptures tell you, the wisdom of this world is foolishness with the Most High. And every founder is confounded by his graven image, meaning they'll make these idols, but realizing that these idols cannot actually do anything is the part of confounding, right? It's to your shame of making this idol that you think has power or life, but really can't do anything. And that's going to explain, right? For his molten image is falsehood. It's a lie. It's false. It's false because it gives a false hope to those that are beguiled into believing that it's real. So you actually live your life, and your actions are affected by something that's not real, but you think it's real. So you pray to it, you make offerings onto it, you work, you do all of these things centered around falsehood. And there is no breath in them, so they're not alive. They are vanity, the work of errors. So the creation and the worship of them are the work of errors, the work of people who are erring, people who don't know better, people who are going in the ways of error. In the time of their visitation, they shall perish. So when the Lord visits them, which is likened unto him trying them or bringing judgment or destruction, those idols perish along with the people. Their idols don't save them. If there's a fire, that wood is going to burn. However, right, the portion of Jacob is not like them. And the portion of Jacob is the Most High. He is not like these idols. For he is the former of all things. See, so unlike these idols that are created by man and are not alive, the Most High, which is unlike them, is the creator. He forms all things. And Israel is the rod or the portion of his inheritance. The Lord Yahweh of hosts is his name. And when you go into the word rod, just to make sense of it, a part of the definition is like an actual rod, like a tree or, a stick or a branch. But when you look into the lexicon for the actual, use in this, in Jeremiah 10, where is it? Here it is. It's this use case here, 5. A measuring rod, a meeting, a portion measured off, right? So when you see this word used in Psalm 74:2 or in Jeremiah 10:16, that's the use case of it, right? Something measured, a portion measured off. So when you read in Jeremiah 10, when it says the rod of his inheritance, it means the portion of the Lord's inheritance, which is Israel. Gather up thy wares out of the land, O inhabitant of the fortress. So basically, start packing up, O inhabitants of the fortress being Israel or Jerusalem. Why? Because you're about to get kicked out. For thus saith the Lord Yahweh, behold, I will sling out the inhabitants of the land at this once. So you know how like David had a sling and you shot those stones from it. That's how the Lord is saying, I'm going to remove you from this land. Like I'm slinging you out of here and will distress them. So he will bring distress upon you that they may find it so that you can, meaning you're going to experience, right? You're going to, by finding it, meaning you're going to actually come to that realization and experience that calamity that the Lord has determined against you. Woe is me for my hurt. My wound is grievous. But I said, truly, this is a grief and I must bear it. And in these verses here, it's, it's almost like the perspective of Israel, right? Or the nation. So it's almost like Jeremiah grieving in the perspective of the nation, as it says, woe is me for my hurt, right? For the judgment that the Lord would bring, for my wound is grievous, right? That the suffering of the calamity that Israel went through when the Babylonians came was a grievous one, right? But I said, truly, this is a grief and I must bear it, because eventually they would realize, like when you read in the book of Lamentations or in the book of, I think it's in Baruch, they mention, right? Israel mentions how they acknowledge their sins and how by their disobedience, the Lord brought this upon them. That's why it mentions, I must bear it. My tabernacle is spoiled. And a tabernacle in a physical sense is like a tent, which looks something like this. Ancient tabernacle. So here's an image. Trying to see if I can find a better one. Let's do tabernacle / tent. I want to find a good one. Okay, this is not bad. So something like this. And you'll see here it's set up, but you need the peg, right? The peg, the nail, right? And then you need the cords to hold and then the wood and so on and so forth to actually set up the structure of it. And I'm showing that visual because it's going to make more sense. So when it says my tabernacle is spoiled, right? My habitation is destroyed and all my cords are broken. And those cords are needed to basically support and hold up the tabernacle, right? My children are gone forth of me. So this is like the perspective of Israel or Jerusalem. And the children being gone forth are the inhabitants of the land being sent away captive. And they are not, right? So they are no more. There is none to stretch forth my tent anymore and to set up my curtains. And the stretching forth of the tent would be to actually set it up to maintain it, right? So in other words, the land has been broken down, the people have been taken out, and there's nobody really left to build it back up. For the pastors are become brutish. The pastors are supposed to are likened unto the overseers of the flock, but they've become brutish, they've become senseless, and have not sought the Lord, but rather through greed and error they have gone after the ways of their own mind. Therefore they shall not prosper, and all their flocks shall be scattered. So all those that listened and took heed to these false leaders, these lying prophets and rulers, which were likened unto the pastors or the shepherds, that would make the people that followed them likened unto their flock. And by by them leading them astray, when this judgment came, the flock would be likened on, or the people would be likened onto a flock or sheep scattered, right, without guidance and without protection. And that's why in I forgot what chapter in Jeremiah we read, but it mentions that they would seek peace and they would find trouble. Behold, the noise of the brute is come. The word brute here actually goes into like a report or a message or news. It says here, right, news, report, rumor. And this is referring to at the time when they would hear or when word would spread that the Babylonians were making their way down into the territory of Judah. So it says here, the noise of the brute has come, and a great commotion out of the north country to make the cities of Judah desolate and a den of dragons, right? So it would become broken down and eventually become a habitation where, you know, creatures that dwell in places with like where few people are, right? You know, that's the dragons here, right? Like the wild animals that move into these different areas. So, for example, if you ever watch a movie where, you know, they'll show you like present day, they'll show you some disaster hitting, and then they'll show you like a time skip, maybe a year or two later, and then you'll see places like Manhattan or places that were cities are now, you know, abandoned. They're broken down. You have trees and vines growing through, and then you'll have those kind of animals that are in there, right? Whether it's like a wildcat, you know, or like a lizard or some jackal or something like that. So that's what it means by the den of dragons, those kind of creatures that come and dwell in places when, you know, it's desolate or destitute of men. Oh, Yahweh, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. So what you do, how you think, and the path you take is not really determined by you. As that's why Jeremiah mentions it's not in you to, you that are moving are not the one necessarily directing your steps. The Lord is ultimately in control. O Lord Yahweh, correct me, but with judgment, not in thine anger. And that judgment meaning measured in a calculated correction, but not in your anger, so you don't go overboard, lest thou bring me to nothing. Because if the Lord was to judge us or judge anybody in the fullness of his wrath, well, that's Obadiah 1, right? And that's what the Lord is going to do to Esau. That's why he's not going to exist anymore. Or the nation of the Edomites will be done away with after they serve their captivity, because the Lord is going to judge them in his anger. But here Jeremiah is pleading to say, don't judge us, you know, in your anger, lest there's nothing left of us. Verse 25, pour out thy fury upon the heathen, right? So instead, you know, don't forget about these heathen as well. Let your wrath come upon them as well, that know thee not, and upon the families that call not on thy name. For they have eaten up Jacob and devoured him, meaning that we have become a prey unto them, right? They have invaded our lands. They have you know, taken our portion, right? They have oppressed us. That's them eating up Jacob and devouring him and consumed him. and have made his habitation desolate. So Jeremiah is saying, don't, you're bringing judgment upon us, right? But please, do it in measure. But also don't forget about these nations that are also having a hand in this. That even goes for the Babylonians that would come and make our land desolate, right? Don't forget about them too, because ultimately we are your chosen people. They don't even serve you. They don't call upon your name. And that brings us to the end of Jeremiah, the 10th chapter. So Lord willing, this was edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahweh Shai, Bahasham, Rechak Wadash. And until next time, Shalom.